My sincere thanks to our friends over on Patreon. I appreciate your continued support. I'd also welcome you to join us in the More Christ community. If you do so, you'll receive a number of perks, including our online book club, where you'll receive free ebooks, early access to new episodes of More Christ, and promotions for in-person events. I'd also welcome you to share the podcast, and give a 5-star rating, depending on where you're listening or watching the podcast. And thank you all, and God bless. Hi, welcome to For Christ. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by Tammy Peterson. Tammy is the host of the Tammy Peterson Podcast, the podcast focusing on the divine feminine, the dark and the light sides of womanhood, practically and symbolically. She's a licensed marriage therapist, and so she's also known as the wife of Dr. Jordan Peterson. Tammy and her husband are blessed with 2 children, namely Julian Peterson, a musician, and Michaela Peterson, who also has an excellent podcast. And now it turns out some grandchildren as well. And I suppose just first of all today, Tammy, can you please tell us a little bit about where you grew up in Canada, a bit about your background, and some of the family even who came from Ireland, as we just mentioned offline there?
Oh, thank you, Marcus. And thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. So I was raised in Northern Alberta. I was raised 400 miles north of Edmonton. So really one of the most northern small settlements in Alberta before you get to the Northwest Territories. So we didn't quite have midnight sun, but in June, the sun will go down and there will be a red haze on the horizon, and then it comes back up again. So it actually doesn't get dark. You can take a picture without a flash at midnight in late June. So it's quite a place, in the wintertime. We used to go to school, and I would leave home at 10 to 9 because I could walk to school in 10 minutes. And it was dark. It was dark. The streetlights were still on. The headlights of the cars were still on. It was dark. And when we got out of school at 3:30, it was dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it's like in Ireland, but I don't know if it's that dark. Mm-hmm. If you're that far north. No, you're not. You're not. Yeah, so we were from a long ways north. My dad was a telegrapher on the Northern Alberta Railway. He took the place of people who had gone on holidays. So he would move from town to town as people needed him to. And as he had more and more children, because eventually I was his 4th child, and we were in Northern Alberta, and the railway was going to close. So we stayed in Northern Alberta. He bought a real estate and insurance business, and we settled there. So that's how we got there. It was just the next stop on the railway, and that's where we stopped. I was actually my first little town was called Whitelaw, and it was 14 miles from Fairview. And Whitelaw had the train, it had a hotel, it had a nursing home, didn't have any schools or anything. I don't even know if it had a grocery store. It was very tiny. And we had a dog there. We moved to Fairview, and we decided not to take the dog because it was too big a town for a dog. 2,000 people, it was too big a town. So we went to this little town, and that's where I began to go to school. And in grade 3, Jordan Peterson moved to town, and he lived across the street from me. And he was in the same class as me, although he was a year younger. And we were very good friends. We played baseball together. We played croquet. He taught me to play chess. We hung out quite a bit when we were in elementary school. Once junior high happened, of course, I grew up faster than he did. And so I left him with his friends, and I went off with my friends. And we didn't really reconnect again until our last year of high school, when we decided that we were going to put all differences aside. Where there were 45 of us in our graduating class, we decided we'd put all differences aside and live as one classroom for the last year, knowing that we would rarely see one another past that. And it's funny because I think, and both of us think, that gesture in grade 12 has been what has spurred us on to having reunions. So we've had reunions every 5 years, and this year is our 40th or 45th. It's a very late reunion, but people have been going to reunions all that time. I think we've been to one, and this is the second one we'll go to. But they even checked with us to make sure the timing was okay. So, and here I am in this little town, and I went to a meeting yesterday, and they're doing whatever they can to keep this little town alive. And there's a resurgence of small towns now because people, especially after the pandemic, realize they don't have to live in the city. They can live outside the city and still have access to whatever they need from the city. And so they're starting to see, they have 2 people who have bought farmland here. They were living in Toronto, and they could buy many acres and a house here for the small apartment that they had in the city. So we might be seeing a change in Canada where people are going back to the little towns. So maybe I'll be able to continue to come here over the years and it will still exist. So they're going to fight for what is here and what the people before here fought to have here. We had a small vocational college that they're trying to close down and take to a bigger center, and they're going to fight for it. And I think that's very good. So I'm happy to be here with them. So I left home when I was 18, like many people did. All my family did. There was no university nearby. There were no real opportunities to get a higher education. So we all went to Edmonton, and once you went to Edmonton, it was 400 miles away. You weren't coming home on the weekend. I mean, I guess you could, but it's a 6-hour drive, so not likely. So by the time I was 12, all my siblings had gone to university, and I was home with my mom and dad. And my mom and dad, by the time I was born, they were back into sports and working full time. And I was raised more by my older brothers and sisters than I was by my mom and dad. But when I was 12, I was left with them, and which was fine. But they were more concerned with what they were doing than what I was doing. And so, so I strayed like every young person does, because they're curious and they don't know what they're doing. And so I strayed. I was curious and adventurous and went off doing whatever kind of adventures seemed to be at my disposal. And I left home when I was 18, and I moved to Montreal, which was 3,000 miles away, and went to university there. So I moved from the Rocky Mountains, really, because we were right beside the Rocky Mountains, all the way to central Canada just before, because then there's Atlantic Canada after that. So we used to call it Eastern Canada, but it really isn't. It's more East Central Canada, but a long ways away. And at that time, you wrote letters. You didn't even call because it was expensive to call. So my mom and I wrote letters. But once I was gone, I was gone, and I was on my road. I was on my own, and my mom and dad gave me luggage when I was 18. I don't know. I think a number of different families gave their kids luggage and said, you're 18, go have a life. And so we all did. We all left home when we were 18. And my dad was very good at teaching us to be independent and to take responsibility for the decisions that we made. And so that's what I was left with. And that served me very, very well for very many years. I did my best to find a path forward that was good for me and a good choice for future me. I was doing my best to design my life so that it fulfilled, so that it had meaning for me. And that worked for a number of years. Then I got married. I got married to Jordan. I was in Montreal. He was in Edmonton or Grand Prairie or somewhere, still in Alberta. And then I left Montreal. I moved to Ottawa and did my degree there, because Ottawa is French and English. And in Montreal, there was a lot of separatism going on then in the French part of the country. And I couldn't get a job because even if I could speak French, because I was an Anglophone, they didn't want me. And that was very interesting early lesson for me, because I got a taste of what it's like to be someone who is not preferred, prefer someone else. So they would just say, job is filled. And then I'd walk by for a month and see the help wanted sign there. So I knew that the job wasn't filled, that they just didn't want me. And so I decided at the end of the year to move to Ottawa. It was only 2 hours from Montreal. I loved Montreal. It was a vibrant city. There was many things that they had in the summer that were free. The swimming pool was free. The comedy fest was free. The jazz fest was free. So there was a lot of great things to do in Montreal, but to make money and to pay your rent, not so easy. So I moved to Ottawa, and I hadn't had a lot of guidance from my parents. So I started reading this book called What Color's Your Parachute? And What Color's Your Parachute is a book to try to find what career is suitable for you. So I did all the exercises, and then I went to the local university in Ottawa, and I said, you know, I like art, I like sports, I like teaching, and I like health. And they said, kinesiology. And I said, okay. And I really even had no idea what it was, but I thought I'd finally described what it is I liked. If there was something at university that fulfilled that, I would study it. So off I went to university, and I got my kinesiology degree. At the end of that degree, my husband was doing his PhD in Montreal, and he phoned me and asked me to come for Thanksgiving. And I did. I came to find him, and his apartment was clean. He was writing a book. He was getting his PhD. He looked like he had his life together, and I thought it was time to get married. And so I married him. And after that, you know, Jordan and I moved to Boston, and he went to Harvard, which was it was a good time to be at Harvard. Today, it's not a good time to be at Harvard, especially today, because I don't know if you saw the news today, but
unfortunately, I did.
University hires who don't know how to define bullying when it comes to anti-Semitism. The strange times now. But when I went to McGill, I think things were still pretty good. This was 1981, and there wasn't even any political correctness around yet. It was pretty, I studied literature and French and philosophy. I studied judo. I studied judo.
Yeah.
I'd go home to Jordan. I'd be feeling so tough, you know. I'm like 5'2", right? And he's 6'1". I'd come home. Oh no, he wasn't there. It was another boyfriend. He was 6'5". So he was really tough. So I'd come home, and I'd like judo, and I'd like take a hold of him. It's like, no, like I'm small, and I would be reminded every time I came out of that class, no, you're small and weak. Because when you're in judo, you feel pretty tough, you know, because you're flipping people and being flipped and not being hurt. And it was I had a good time in university. You know, my first year was arts, but then when I went and I did a science degree, that was also very good, although I hadn't been in university for 7 years, I think, by the time I finally got into my science degree. And I had to, like, what is a periodic table in chemistry? I couldn't remember all that stuff. It was gone. So I had to relearn everything. But over 4 years, I decided I'd become a massage therapist. And that was good because I got to be very close to people one-on-one. And I learned to really, I think I started to learn to listen to people, because you had someone who'd come in and they didn't know what was wrong. They kind of knew what was wrong because they had aches and pains, but not really. And I'd have to really listen and pay attention to discover what it was that was bothering them and causing them pain. And so I think that was good training for my future listening and understanding my relationship with God, because you have to listen. And until I was a massage therapist, I don't think I'd done much listening at all. And I still really wasn't listening other than when I was doing massages. I mean, I guess I was, but not consciously listening. I mean, it wasn't an aim for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's an aim for me to listen. And I had no idea how profound an action it is to listen. I don't know if anybody, no one had really told me that. I hadn't read it anywhere. I wasn't reading biblical things, so I guess maybe I missed it there. But I was learning it pretty naturally through trying to live a good life. I was learning slowly to listen. And, Jordan and I, when we got married, we decided the first thing we would do is tell the truth. So that meant we were listening. We were listening to each other. Even if I was still thinking things I shouldn't have been thinking, I was acting in a way that I tried to be as authentic as I could in my actions. And so it looks to me like there was a slow increase in understanding and a slow increase in my seeking a higher consciousness. But it was haphazard kind of, because I really didn't, and maybe all of us are kind of haphazard in the beginning, unless we have really good people who are talking to us and teaching us when we were young. And I wouldn't say I had that much. I had grandparents, my grandmothers, they were pretty good. They went to church. My dad's mom played the organ in the church, and when she was in her 90s, she used to play in a band and go from nursing home to nursing home playing music for the old people when she was in her early 90s. My other grandmother sung in the choir, and she was a church lady for sure, both in the Protestant church. Mm-hmm. But my parents, no, they didn't. And my siblings, no. My brother's an atheist. Mm-hmm. My sisters are Christian, but not practicing in any way. So there just wasn't a lot of, so then Jordan, and his writing, I never spent much time listening to him. I just let him be in his office at home. Mm-hmm. If he was in his office working, I didn't bother him. I just let him work. And then when it was dinner time, he'd come down. Maybe he'd help me prepare dinner and help me clean up dinner and things like that. It wasn't like he was not present at all. But when he was working, and I left him alone. And he told me he was very grateful for that, because he said he would put together a number of different thoughts in his mind, and if somebody came in asking a question, it would just all fall away. Mm-hmm. And so it was best that we left him alone. He never really described it to us that way, but I think if he had, we would have understood. But we did leave him alone. The kids weren't allowed to interfere with him either, although he was very playful and loved to play with the children. When he was working, he was on his own. Now, I don't know what you want to know about my life, but that kind of brings me up to when I was married and I had kids.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Tammy. And I feel somewhat vindicated just looking at the questions. I write out questions in advance just to keep my mind on track. And you've answered like 5 or 6 of them that I had consecutively. So that's brilliant. That makes me feel vindicated, I guess. So another thing I think to tie in with your relationship with Jordan, I think that's important to me is you both are, I think, a really positive model of this covenant of marriage. And even many Christians don't focus on the spirituality that's available in marriage and how we can come to know God through marriage and so on. And marriage as precisely that covenant rather than just a kind of contract they can just toss away and so on. I've appreciated Jordan's thoughts on that, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts on that. And it's interesting too, because even my wife's family, as I said, they're from Zimbabwe. Some of them were scattered in Australia and all these different places. And yet, like we mentioned, I don't know how we mentioned Jordan. We're talking about videos online, all this kind of stuff. And I mentioned Jordan, and one of the young, like 20 somethings, females, she was like, oh yeah, he does that like dating advice and stuff on marriage. I find him really helpful. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I'd be the one sort of guy that would listen to like 3 hour lectures, the biblical series and all that kind of stuff. So we're coming at it from very different perspectives. But I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, and some practical tips that you might have to stay strong in your marriage, building on that ultra focus on truth that you talk about and things like that. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Thanks, Now.
I don't think I need these. Can you talk? Can you hear me still?
Yes, that's perfect.
Oh, okay. I don't need this. I thought I did, but I don't. So, so when Jordan and I were first married, it wasn't long. I guess we were married in 89 and we had a baby in 92. So it was a little while. And he'd been used to having me around by then. So I'd been around for about 3 years with him. But when I had a baby, I got busy, and I was very busy, and I was tired as well, because you're up at night. So you have to do quite a bit of sleeping. And I was also physically satisfied because I was with a baby. And when you're with a baby, you're giving so much of yourself already that there's no feeling of loneliness when you're with a baby, right? But Jordan was feeling lonely because he didn't have that baby and he didn't have me anymore. And so he came home from work one night and he said, I'm real lonely and you're not paying attention to me like you did. And I said, yeah, well, I said, I'm not very lonely, but maybe we could schedule some dates, and that would put in the time necessary to devote to one another that we don't seem to be doing right now. And he agreed that he would try, although he was initially skeptical and thought that was a boring way to think of a date. But I said, when we were dating, we scheduled them. Just because we're married doesn't mean we don't. It's off. It's not allowed anymore. No scheduling dates because you're married. It's like, no, I don't think there's a rule like that. I think we could just schedule dates. So we started scheduling dates. And then, but with Jordan, I convinced him that was a good idea. Okay, then what does that mean exactly? Can you imagine him saying that? What does that mean exactly? So he said, well, what's that mean? Okay, so what's that mean? It means he'll tidy up the living room. He'll tidy up the living room and light candles, and he'll put on some music. I said, okay, you do that. I'll have a shower, put on something nice, and I'll come into the living room. And so we did that, and we decided how many times a week are we going to do this? Well, he thought 3 times a week because he was pretty lonely. Say, okay, fine, 3 times a week. And what were the rules? Well, you can't look at your computer and you can't answer the phone, and don't be answering the door or talking about anything other than just being together. So this is about being together. And so we had some ground rules that we laid down initially, right at the beginning. And one of the things that we learned pretty quick on was that he would say, date tonight, like he wanted date tonight. And I'd say, well, I'm kind of tired today. How about tomorrow? And he'd say, okay. And that meant that I had said tomorrow I had made a deal, and it was up to me to make sure that I could honor that deal. So the next day, if I was tired, I had to have a nap so that I was ready. So I had to do what was necessary to come to the date in the best frame of mind possible. And some days you just don't want to be there. But yesterday you said you would. So what do? So you have a shower and you get dressed. You put on something nice. Maybe you put some perfume on. And by the time you've had a shower and you've got dressed, you're starting to think that maybe this might be okay. And even if you get together and you start to dance and you're still not all that thrilled to be there, you dance for a little while and the music's on and you have a dance and it goes all right, and so you can kind of get yourself in a state of mind that is somewhat generous. You can try, right? You can try. What we've learned in the later part of our marriage is that, and as he talks about this on stage, that you have to do, if you're in a marriage, you have to speak to one another for about 90 minutes a week on issues that are in the family or in the business or in the house or whatever is on your mind in the world, like whatever is bothering you, you have to get it out on the table and you have to talk about that about 90 minutes a week. But really what he's saying, I think, is that if you ask for a date and your wife comes in and she's all dressed nice and so are you and you're all ready and she says, there's just something on my mind, the dog is not being walked enough. The dog, and every time the dog needs to be walked, I'm walking the dog, and we got to talk about this because we've got to negotiate this better. And at first, when I used to bring those things up, Jordan would think, okay, no date tonight. That's what he would think right away. As soon as I brought something up, oh yeah, sure, she said she was going to have a date, but she's not having any date. But he's come to realize that if he listens to what I have to say and truly listens and negotiates with me or helps me on with whatever it is that I'm concerned about, then we can have a date. And so he's realized, oh yeah, so there are things that have to be talked about pretty regularly, like every week, if you're going to be able to have romance in your life. So you can't expect there to be just this blissful moment if there's a whole bunch of stuff that you haven't talked about yet. If there's anything under the rug, it's going to be separating the two of you. And so really not leaving anything under the rug, talking about things, even if you don't have an answer, just bringing the things up that are on your mind can make the situation, can clear the situation of extenuating circumstances, and then you can be together. And it's quite remarkable how well that works. It does work well, but it is an ongoing. And so really what you ought to do is probably go have lunch together once a week or something and have a good chat, or dinner together once a week and have a good chat, or go for a walk or something in order to hopefully be confident enough to discuss the things that you think aren't worthwhile talking about, because the things that you are worried about aren't that big of a problem, but they are whether you think so or not. And you have to accept your vulnerability and just say what you have to say. And that has been very good for us because we can be present now with one another, and we can have that bit of time together. Maybe it's 2 hours or something. And then, you've had your time together and it's good. You can go off and do whatever it is, the other things that you have to do. So in a way, it's in the same category as anything else you do. Like it's special and all of that, but it's no more or less special than anything else you might do in your life. So all those things that you think that you have to do, well, one of those is relating to your spouse. That's the other thing you have to do. And so you might as well do it in the way that you can both accept as reasonable, or maybe even enjoyable. You right? So we definitely have learned that, and I think that that's a very important thing. Now with children, I don't know, do you want to talk about children?
Yeah, that was next on my list, of course.
Oh, okay. We had Sunday meetings. We had a meeting at 4:00 on Sundays. The kids always wanted to be outside, but we made them come in. and have a meeting. And in the meeting, and this is when the kids were old enough to set the table and things like that, like old enough. And we would decide what kind of chores they would take on for that week. And so in the beginning, they would say yes to sweeping the floor or something. And then as the week went on, they realized they really didn't want to sweep the floor. But we would have weekly meetings so that they could, the next Sunday, we're like, I'm not choosing sweeping the floor this week. I didn't like sweeping the floor. And so they would, although they would argue about sitting with us on Sundays, because what we were doing was never as important as what they were doing. We would have them sit with us, not for very long, maybe 45 minutes, like it was as much time as we would get from them. But when they went off to university, they told us kind of begrudgingly later, after their university time was over, that on Sundays they would get together with their roommates and decide who was going to take out the trash that week. And so they did the same thing with their roommates. So it was a good thing to do, because it put some order into the chaos of living with each other, which if you don't negotiate agreements, then it's chaotic, and it's never relaxing, because you never know what's going to happen next, because nobody has any idea of what they're responsible for. So that was a good thing to do. Somebody here, I don't know who. Shouldn't be anybody here. Let's see, what else with kids? Well, Michaela was very sick, right? So when she was just really little, when you put your kids on your shoulders, if you put her on the ground, she would cry. So I think she had arthritis in her hips when she was just a wee little tyke, practically before she could walk. So I think as soon as we started feeding her food, she started getting inflammation in her body for some reason. Her genetics, whatever, made it that way. And by the time she got to school, she had a hard time sitting for story time. They had to give her a chair to sit on because her knees hurt too much. And, she was less and less and less mobile. And she got put on medication that helped her a lot when she was in grade 2, I guess. And Jordan sat down with her and had a talk with her, and he said, kid, oh yeah, and then I think it was later, because not only did she have arthritis, but she was falling asleep all the time. So I fell asleep all the time, because if I ate gluten, I just passed right out, and I guess she inherited the same problem. So she would have a terrible time getting up in the morning for school. And eventually I learned that when she got to school, she just used to go out on the grass and sleep. So she was just sleeping all the time. And some days she'd be in quite a bit of pain in the morning. And Jordan sat down and had to talk with her. And he said, hey, kiddo, I know that you're not well, but you have to be really careful that you don't use your illness as an excuse not to do the things that you need to do in your life. And so, if you are too sick, that's one thing. But if you can get out of bed, get out of bed. Get out of bed and go do the things that you want. Because eventually, if you start using your disease as an excuse not to do things, you won't know what's true eventually, and you'll be lost. And so I think that was a very good thing for Jordan to teach Michaela, because she was very, very ill, and she continued to get sicker and sicker and sicker. She had a few junior high, she was pretty healthy. Junior high, the biologics worked pretty well, but then in high school, her joints started to fail because the damage had been done when she was young. So her whole childhood was pretty riddled with pain and illness. But Michaela, she didn't use her illness as an excuse, even though it took her out terribly. She never used it as an excuse. And Michaela is now, she's now well. So who knows, what if you use your illness as an excuse, well, that takes some time and energy to put into that, because you're creating a false story as an excuse for your life. You're not going to be able to attend to those things that you might have attended to. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened with Michaela, but she did eventually get well. So she did attend to what was there in front of her and found her way to finding health again. So yeah, so that's something. Don't use your illness as an excuse. And in our universities and our schools, we're definitely teaching kids to do that. And it's a very, the whole idea of safe spaces and also everybody has an illness or a personality flaw that they're trying to wear as a badge of honor. And it's not good. It's not good. It sets you up for missing the adventure of your life that you could have if you weren't holding on to these things. Because what do we talk about? We talk about being attached to anything other than God is going to take you in places that aren't good. And so if you attach yourself to your whatever it is, your illness or your discomfort because of emotional trouble or whatever it is, and fair enough, people have trouble, but you don't want to attach yourself to that, because you attach yourself to that, you're not going to be able to see what God has in store for you. So you have to let that stuff go. And just like you have to let other people go to have their own lives, you can imagine, I imagine people being held in God's hands, and that seems to help me to let them go. Like everybody is the dog, we're holding everybody in God's hands. Everybody's being held individually in God's hands. I always see them individually. I don't see people in groups in God's hands. I see them one by one. And that for me is good, because it means that I am not responsible for those people. I can do what I can to help, but I'm not responsible for their decisions and where they go. So those things, I think, were maybe the most outstanding things that we did with our children.
That's powerful. Thanks, Tammy. And then I suppose Julian isn't as well known, although, as I think you've said in other podcasts now, he's come into the scene a bit more with his musical talent, and he's now partaking in some of these events that you're doing. I wonder what are maybe some of the distinctive challenges that came with being a mother to a boy, a son, and some of the special rewards that come with being, again, a mother to a son, if that makes sense.
Well, when Julian was born, I smelled his head, and it smelled like the best smell I've ever smelled in the world. And so it was true love right away. As soon as he was born, I was so in love with him. And he was a lovely little boy. He was younger than Michaela, right? So he came second. He was 22 months younger than her. And Michaela was good. We taught her to come and get a hug when we had Julian, because we knew that she'd be lonely, because we would be attending to the baby. And so if Jordan and I would hug, Michaela would wiggle her way in between us. So we taught her to come for a hug and to tell us whenever she needed attention, which she did learn to do. She's pretty extroverted. She gets what she needs. I believe that she gets what she needs. I hope she does. But Julian, he was a little less extroverted than her. It was funny because we did personality testing later when they were older and figured out actually what they were like. But when they were kids, what we thought they were like, we thought Michaela was kind of a disagreeable person. And then when I say disagreeable, I mean somebody who is not willing to be told what to do. When I say disagreeable, that's really what I mean. Not really, maybe I'm not saying that they don't listen. They may listen and change their behavior, but you don't just arbitrarily tell them what to do, because they probably won't. Because it makes you kind of stubborn when you're disagreeable. When you're agreeable, then you're more likely to attend to what people say and help out with things happening. And men are more disagreeable than women. So Julian was more disagreeable than Michaela. It turned out Michaela wasn't disagreeable. She was just emotional. So she used to respond to things and tell us what she thought, but she was very compassionate and very much somebody who was caring and who was someone who was there for other people, for sure. And Julian, he was very emotionally stable. So we thought he was agreeable because he never complained about anything, but we never noticed that he didn't do anything that we wanted to do. He did the things that he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a pretty disagreeable person. Turned out Michaela was agreeable, a little volatile, and Julian was disagreeable, very emotionally stable. And so he's been always a very emotionally stable, very grounded, really somebody that you could always talk to. And Michaela, when she was ill, Michaela was in maybe grade 10 when her hip and her ankle started to disintegrate. And Julian would have been in grade 9 and grade 10.
Mm-hmm.
And you think of a kid in grade 9 or 10, they're pretty happy to be with their friends and out doing, finding out what the world is like. And Julian used to come home every day after school. He came home every day, and he may have gone down and, played computer games in his bedroom or something, but he wasn't out looking for trouble. He was home, being there in case he was needed, and wow, that was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So he was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually went off to university, which broke my heart because I wanted him around. But he went off to university, and that was good. He was gone for about 5 years, got a university degree and found a wife, and came home. They had broken up. He came home because he wanted to come back to Toronto, and she was in love with Halifax, and her family was there, and she wasn't ready to leave. But then Julian left, and they had a year of being miserable, both of them apart. So then she came to Toronto eventually, and they got married and set up a life there and have 2 kids now. And that's where they live. And, Julian, when I was, and I don't know, I can't understand everything. I try to understand as much as I can, but when I was sick, and I was told I was going to die in 10 months, I came home to tell Julian and Jill. And they were outside, I remember, and I looked at Julian and I told him, and I saw a terrible grief on his face that I hadn't noticed, because Jordan was in the office with me when I was told. And I guess because the doctor told both of us, I didn't have to tell my husband. So I didn't see his grief really. But when I told Julian, I saw his grief, and I saw a love that he had for his mother that was much more profound than the love I had for myself. I didn't feel worthy until that moment. That's when I really felt worthy of not just accepting the prognosis of 10 months, but accepting help to treat my illness and to, with God's help, to survive or not. But I decided that the doctor had an opinion he had an opinion of my likelihood of survival, but that was an opinion. And only God knows if we're going to live or die. And I realized that at that moment. So I don't think that I had ever loved myself enough. I had spent my life kind of cynical with some self-doubt. And I felt that lift off my shoulders at that moment. I felt filled with God's love. And I realized that my time here that was left, I would devote to loving my family and accepting whatever help came my way with gratitude. And so whatever happened to me in that moment set me up for what I think was a miraculous experience of being ill and finding God and getting better again. You know, it was so strange because Jordan was probably more sick than I was, even though I was very sick physically. I lost 30 pounds. I was so sick, but George was so worried about me, and I told him I'd be better again in August on my anniversary. And when I finally did find a specialist who claimed to be able to find the leak that was in my lymph system and having all my fluids leaking into my legs instead of going to my cells, I told Jordan that I would be better by our anniversary, and it turned out that I went to Pennsylvania to see a specialist there who said he was sure he could help me and find it, but he couldn't find the leak. And I had been praying the Opus Dei novena for the sick. And on the 5th day, they were going to do another surgery where they were going to open me up and look. And the thing is, the lymph system is like a spider web inside you. You know, I can't see how anybody could see where the problem was. They were going to they had tried to use an MRI. They filled me full of dye, filled my lymph system full of dye. And then they looked on the screen around my abdomen to see if they could see a plume where there was a leak, but they couldn't see it. So I don't know how they thought they were going to find it by opening me up, but that was the plan. And I thought, well, before they open me up, because they're going to open me up, I'm going to eat some fat and see whether the fat leaks into this bag that I have that's collecting all the fluid. And when I ate some fat, there was no fat in the bag. And so I thought, well, I don't know what that means. They told me what it means, but it's not up to me to decide. So the next morning they told me to do a food challenge and eat some fat. I said I'd already done that. I showed them the bag. It was clear. And they said, you're healed. And that day was my anniversary. You know, it was a miracle. And Jordan even says, how do you explain that? That's what he says. How do you explain that?
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing, Tammy. And actually, I wanted to ask you something on top of that, because it would be easy, given those struggles, given the suffering that you've gone through, and Jordan and Kayla and all as well, to turn against the body, so to speak, which a lot of modern feminism does. Unfortunately, it seems, this kind of new wave of feminism, and there seems to be this parallel trajectory that you and others are on. Mary Harrington, Janice Fiamenko, who you've had a wonderful conversation with. You've had a great conversation with Louise Perry, and there's this femininity that I think you emphasize in how you carry yourself, as well as on the podcast, and you explore some of these ideas. I'm thinking here of, there's a great quote by Oz Guinness, who is doing the Exodus series with Jordan, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with Oz a few times. He says, contrast is the mother of clarity. I suppose, like, contrasting those two, how does modern feminism and its rejection of the body differ from that femininity that accepts the body that God has given us, and how we experience God's love through that, even if it is true suffering, and finding redemption through that suffering? Does that make sense?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I spoke with someone named Janice Fiamenko. She was a university professor of English, and in 2014 she was looking at the boys in the room while she was teaching about feminism, and realized that what she was saying was not helpful to them. And she started to go back into the most the furthest back into feminists she could find, and to read about the women we revere. And she has done a number of conversations with me talking about these women that we say are the mothers of feminism. And outlining how resentment was really at the bottom of their narratives. And, we like to think that first wave feminism was all good because it was women who were looking for the vote. But really, I've heard about that too. They had vote. They had a municipal vote. So they had votes within their cities, within their communities and in their cities. What they didn't have was a national vote. And they wanted the national vote. But at the time, the reason there was a national vote was because men were voting whether to go to war or not. And it was men who were going to go to war. It wasn't women who were going to war. So it really, to me, didn't sound, maybe they wanted to vote on that. And maybe they thought it was reasonable for them to decide what their husbands should do. But it's questionable whether that's the truth or not. It's questionable. So even that is questionable, what they were looking for back then. And let's say that the first wave feminism was good. Let's say that it was. It's not good anymore. It has, if it had ever done anything that was good, and I know that women we have way more opportunity than we had then, and that's good. And kids who are born into families where women are educated do better than kids who are born into families where women aren't educated do worse. So it's not that I'm trying to say that women shouldn't be educated, but resentment is it's a bad emotional state. It doesn't set you up for finding something to make things better. Resentment makes things worse. It's just a fact. And so if there's any resentment in the movement, it's going to make things worse. And that's one of the, if you read any self-help books, all the things that you can suffer from, they say resentment is the worst. The resentment will kill you. And so if that is if that's at the basis of feminism, we have to really look again at that narrative, and there's a number of Mary Harrington as well as Louise Perry in their books. Mary Harrington has she's got a very clear mind, and she's also talking about finding a path forward with, what does she call it? Feminism of care? Is that what she calls it? Because there's feminism of freedom, which is what everybody has been talking about. Freedom for women, freedom to do what they want to do. But what about the freedom? What about the feminism of care? And so, the number of babies that have not been born because of abortion. We never talked about the pill very much. The pill's been around since 1961 or 62. I took the pill when I was 15. I took the pill off and on till I was 30. It was bad for me. It was bad for me. It made me depressed, and it made me more less compassionate, less able to see the other side of things, another point of view. And I wonder sometimes when I look at the arguments that are going on now, if the woman isn't taking the pill. I wonder that when I see women screaming in some of these protests that I see, I wonder what is going on, with these women, because that's how I felt on the birth control pill. It was terrible. And I waited for Dr. Sarah Hill. She wrote Our Brain on the Birth Control Pill. She's a good person to interview. She talks about people who go on the pill, women who go on the pill, that they have to be so careful when they first go on the pill to see if they're emotions are changing, or if their attitudes are changing, or if they are seeing their friends less, or if they're working less, or if anything is changing, you have to be very attentive, because these are hormones that we're taking that we never talked about till just recently. And now we have young girls and young boys taking hormones to change their genders from one to the other, as if taking hormones was a good idea. Maybe we should have talked about women taking birth control pills. And I think part of the problem with the birth control pill is that it's a synthetic progesterone. It's not natural. And that might be part of the problem. And they're not, Sarah Hill, she's been trying to talk to manufacturers about this, is that the hormones that they're putting in the pills are destructive. And so even that, we haven't talked about it till now. And the pill it was 60 years ago that it first came in. So why haven't we talked about it? And I think women, men have always talked in groups, and men have, had men's groups. And I've never been in a men's group because I'm a woman. So if a woman is in a men's group, it's not a men's group anymore. And so I don't know how they work, but I know anyway, that men, they joke with each other and they push with each other, and they find out who you listen to and who listens. They find out who talks and who listens, and everyone gets in their space. They get in their place, and when you're in your place, then you can relax, because now you're where you ought to be, and you know the hierarchy and all of that. Whereas women have been in homes with their children, they've been in communities with other women and children, and like historically, and now we're in society and we're working, but it's very new, and we don't know how to do it like men do. I mean, men know how to do it. It's in their genetics. It's been happening. It's who they are, and it's who men are together. Whereas women, what are women together? Women size each other up for what we look like. And so we're very judgmental, because we want to keep our kids safe. We have to be judgmental. But that was when we were at home and we were keeping our kids safe in our homes. Now we're in workplaces where we're supposed to be working with other people, getting along with other people, and making the organization work better. But it's been such little time that women have been in that situation that they're still in the mind. They're still, I think, stuck in this time of competition between women for a man, or protecting their children from strangers. And so if you're a friend, you're in the in group, and if you're not, you're in the out group, and that means you're dangerous. And so it's very black and white, there's no nuance in it. And so I think that feminism has taken us from our homes and our communities, and have thrust us into the workplaces. And now we look back at our communities and our families, and they're empty. Like, who took over the families and the communities? There wasn't anybody, because the men were working. The men were all working. Now the women have left home to work, and they're trying to work in men's jobs. So they're trying to take the place of men. And in doing that, they look back and they wonder why the communities and the families aren't working. And we wonder why there's tyranny. There's tyranny because if there's nobody at the local level paying attention at the local level to local problems, then the authority is given up higher up. And then if there's nobody there, then it's higher up, and then it's forced down. The authority is forced down to try to control the people that are at the bottom. Because if the people at the bottom aren't doing all the things that it takes to make it run properly at the bottom, then you're giving up responsibility to the people at the top. So a lot of the world now is top-down authority. Well, the women have, I do think that this is part of the problem anyway, that women have left their families and they have gone into the workplace, And so their small communities there's nobody there. You know what's there is the school. So now the schools have the children and they think they're their children. Well, why wouldn't they think they were their children? There aren't any parents around. There are, the parents are at work, they're not picking their kids up. Maybe, they have someone to pick them up, but it isn't necessarily the parents anymore, the mother. And I put this at the feet of mothers, that we're not present for our kids, that we've been taught. And it's not, you can't really blame or find fault, but you just have to realize what's going on. We have left our communities thinking that our worth is only in the marketplace. And it's not that it's not worth anything in the marketplace, but it's also we've left our responsibility that we used to have at home. And many kids aren't being born, and the ones that are being born are being put into daycares, and they've been put into daycares very young. And if you put kids between 0 and 3 in daycare, it breaks their attachment with their caregiver, which is their mother usually, and they're just forming a very good attachment with their mothers, and then they get put into daycare, and that time that they are away, then they don't know. So their cortisol levels go up, because those are their when you're stressed, then your cortisol levels go up, and those cortisol levels, when they go up over time, cause later in adolescence anxiety and depression. So they're finding that kids who are put in daycare too early end up with anxiety and depression in their adolescence, because they have different attachments than they used to have. A straightforward attachment. Mom comes home, you run to her and you have a hug. What's a dysfunctional attachment? Mom comes home, you turn away and sulk. You turn away and sulk, and you won't look. That's an attachment that's been damaged, right? And that's just one instance. I'm sure there's many different ways that people respond to that, to try to deal with the discomfort that they feel when their caregiver is gone. And that caregiver, when they're little like that, is gone. They don't know that they're coming back. And so it does cause cortisol levels to rise, and that does have far-reaching consequences. So even that little bit of information that's the feminist, that's what feminism has to answer for. And I haven't even got into the education system and gender and all of that. I mean, there's so much to it. There's so much to it.
No, I appreciate that, Tammy. I appreciate that you're calling out these things. That's been for me one of the key things, identifying some themes in your podcast, that you do speak truth to power vis-a-vis that kind of corporatist mixture of government and kind of mega corporations, which are increasingly abstract and bureaucratic and far away from home. It's completely disembodied, this kind of abstract love for humanity, but you don't actually do anything about it. And like you said, there's some really toxic institutions and incentives with modern feminism, and the structures that is being created because of that, in part because of that ideology, as well as technological developments, I suppose. We've got our fight in our hands, so I appreciate that you're taking the fight to these areas. And it reminds me of, there's a lady, Nancy Pearson, professor, who I most appreciate, and she's got a book, Love Thy Body, where she talks about the underlying kind of ideological assumptions of what it means to be a person, that tie abortion and transgenderism and all these things together, and how it's so toxic, and offers as I say, this affirmative Christian view of the body is good. And even though we suffer in life, that it's created by God and it's valuable, and we're meant to work through it. And then I suppose, to your point, that sort of scales in these communities, like our biological family and so on, well, it's not perfect or necessary, and necessary but insufficient or something like that, I suppose. But another element that I was thinking of that might tie in here, I think, in an interesting way, is friendship. Something that again, there's too little focus on today. They would kind of use friendship in that abstract sense, at 5,000 friends on Facebook and so on. But many of them are really your friends. You have to be in the thick of it with people, body to body. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. And you've shared your story of your friendship with Queenie a few times, which I thought was quite moving. I wonder if you might speak to that, or any others, other friends of yours who've been particularly helpful for you on the journey then?
Sure. So when I was ill, my mother-in-law came. She stayed with me quite a bit in the hospital and at home when I was recovering. My husband's sister, Bonnie, she came. She's also a nurse, and she came and stayed with me. She also, when Michaela was sick, she came and stayed with her. She's very, very helpful lady and very compassionate and very. She's got a good. Because she's a nurse, she has a good rapport with the nurses and the doctors. So she's a good advocate to have in the room. My sister's a nurse too. She came, she came and stayed with me. So I had all these people, not only those people, but my husband and my kids and my friends. And so Queenie was one of my friends. I have a friend who's a massage therapist, now an osteopath. She was there. I have another friend, she's a psychologist who went to university with Jordan. And we've been friends for, over 30 years. She was also present there. And I had other friends that came and just prayed with me at the hospital. I have a friend who's a doctor and his wife, and they came and prayed with me at the hospital. So it was, like I said, I made a concerted effort to be grateful for anyone who came to be with me there, and I took part in whatever they offered. And so it wasn't just the rosary, although the rosary was every day and constant when I was in the hospital. It was also other parts of the day where people would come and pray with me or play cards with me or go for a walk with me. Sometimes we'd go for a walk. It was summertime, although I was cold because I was too much underweight. I wanted to keep my strength up, so I would take my IV pole and go walk around the block. We were close to the legislature, and I would go, there was a flower bed where there would be butterflies in the flower bed, and I would go over there and watch them. And it was nice to go outside, and someone would always walk with me. It would be my son, or it would be Queenie, or it would be Jordan. And my husband, of course, was constantly there. I asked him the other day because I hadn't remembered, but I remembered that when we would gone into emergency, and when you're in emergency, sometimes you lay on a gurney for quite a while, before people come. And I was laying on this gurney pretty much through the night, and Jordan laid on the floor beside me. And I said thank you to him the other day when I remembered that he'd been laying on the floor in the hospital. And he said, he said, even when he was in my hospital room, there was only one bed. He slept on the floor a number of times. I said, oh, I didn't know that. I appreciate that. It's, you don't remember when you're sick like that. You only remember snippets really of what happened. And so to be reminded of all the love and attention that I received is overwhelming for me. I wanted to mention Theology of the Body. I've been reading Christopher Weiss, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
I think his name, yeah. He wrote a book called Theology of the Body for Beginners, which is I think a really good idea, because Theology of the Body must be 1,000 pages, right? I don't know. I haven't got a copy yet, but I've heard that it's a very long book. And I interviewed a woman who suggested Theology of the Body, and then she said, maybe you should read Theology of the Body for Beginners. Mm-hmm. So I did. And wow, I couldn't believe how informative Pope John Paul II, his writing was on the meaning of the body theologically, and that we have from begin, and I loved the he talks about in the Bible where Adam is naming the animals. He's naming the animals, and then he's named. He gets his name, and he realizes he's alone. And what that means is he's not an animal. He's a person because he's got inspired breath. That makes him a person, and he's not an object. He's a subject, and because he's a subject, he's working his way towards his love for God and his love for his neighbor, which he fulfills when a rib is taken from him, and Eve is present, and so he has the love of God and love of thy neighbor. But it's through the body that you experience all of these things. You don't experience them through your mind, you experience them through your body. So you experience God's love through your body. And you know how I said that when I told Julian that I was going to die and I saw his grief, I could feel in my body, I could feel self-doubt and cynicism leave my body, and I could feel my body fill with God's love. And so it was a very embodied experience, even though it was a completely individual spiritual experience. It was not immaterial. It was reality. It was in my body. And so that's fascinating. I have to, read the rest of the book. I've read quite a bit of it. Read the rest of the book, take notes, read it again, because there's a lot in it. But it's not that long of a book. So it's doable. I recommend people read that book, Theology of the Body, by Pope John Paul II. And I've been someone from, there's a group in the States called Endow who read letters to women that Pope John Paul II wrote to women.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be talking to them soon too. And I feel that women have a long ways to go to find their way, and whatever I can do to help for myself, maybe I'll help other people too.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Tammy. And another thing I wanted to ask you about, I think again in line with some of the things we're talking about, is your prayer life and what your prayer life looks like now as a practicing Christian, say coming from that nominal background and everything. And I think especially the Lord's Prayer, which I've seen you speak about, I think in part because it means a lot to me. So my own background, I came from nihilistic at different times, and then believing God was this kind of transcendent spirit out there beyond time, matter, and space, but kind of cold and impersonal. Went through Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, and all those kind of things, and Buddhism. But whenever I first became a believing Christian in my 20s, then I was kind of blown away by this emphasis on God's fatherhood, this Abba of the Bible, and that we can actually know him as a person, to your point about personhood. And Pope John Paul II is really good in this theology of personhood. And in that case, like even our earthly mothers and fathers are just a pale imitation in some ways, but also a participation, I guess, that we can again experience God through these people. I wonder what you might say to that, and sort of what resonates with you about the Lord's Prayer, for example.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that when my mom passed away and my daughter was ill, I prayed to my mother. And I'm doing the lessons for Catholicism right now, right? And I told my priest, I said, I've been praying to my mom. We were talking about Mother Mary, and I said, I've been praying to my mom. And he said, oh yeah. He said he prays with people who pray to their parents. And he said, oh yeah, that seemed all right. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'm glad that seems all right to you. It seemed all right to me. And I think that, well, it felt to me like when Michaela got better that my mom had helped. And of course, I realize through praying the rosary that I'm praying although I'm praying to Mary, I'm praying for her intercession to Jesus Christ. And so I've been reading the, praying the Hail Mary, and someone told me, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb. And then Jesus, you say Jesus, and then you say Hail Mary, full of grace. But someone said, yeah, actually it's blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Jesus, Hail Mary, Mother Mary, pray for us sinners now and then. So you're asking Jesus through Mary to be with us through our life unto our death. And that made more sense to me now. I see the hierarchy of understanding of that prayer a bit now. But the Lord's Prayer, I prayed the Lord's Prayer in the hospital in the middle of the night, and during the painful scans that I would have in the hospital, whenever when I was afraid of anything, I prayed the Lord's Prayer. I've been praying the Lord's Prayer my whole life. It was the prayer that I think, I don't know if we were taught the prayer in school, because we prayed to the Queen. I mean, we said we used to, when we were little kids, the Queen's picture was on the wall of the school, and we prayed we didn't say, "Oh Canada," we said, "God save the Queen." Yeah, God save the Queen. And so I don't know where I heard the Lord's Prayer. It might have been in the United Church. I went to the United Church until I was 12, and we would have prayed in the church. I don't know if we were taught in Sunday school, but we prayed in the church, and that was enough for me to memorize that prayer and to hold that prayer as the central prayer for me to my prayer life. I'll pray Hail Mary in the mornings. I'll pray the rosary in the mornings, but I can pray the Lord's Prayer all day and in the night. And let's say Our Father. Yeah, it's a powerful prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. So you go right up there. You go right up and you say thank you to the highest, Our Father who art in heaven. Hallowed be your name. And so your name's on top. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. And so then you want to be humble and have that kingdom come. Your kingdom come. Thy will be done. Thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will. Thy will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. So finding the thread, right? Finding the thread between earth and heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day. So one day at a time, right here I am. I'm here right now. What is it? Give us this day our daily bread. And so what is the challenge of the day that's for me? And may I see it. So give us this day our daily bread, that we forgive those who trespass against us. So you want to be present enough with God, with this thread to heaven, that when something happens in your day and you can take offense, or you can be, you can react. You can react, that you don't react, that you stay still, and you pause. And you pause and you wait for the response to be something that won't make things worse, that'll make things better, right? So give us our daily bread as we forgive those who trespass against us, to lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So the whole prayer is really in order to set up each moment so that you will respond to whatever is next in the proper way and not make any errors. You try not to make any errors, but if you do, of course, then, you ask for forgiveness right away and make amends right away so that you can continue on your way. But so our Father, it just takes you. I love how, the Jesus prayer. I like the Jesus prayer. If I'm really feeling like I've been hard done by or something, so I'm not where I need to be, which is on my knees. I can pray the Jesus prayer, and it's a very short prayer. And if I repeat it enough, I can get my knees to bend, I can get my knees to bend. I can find myself back where I need to be in order to learn the next thing that I have to learn. Yeah. And I find that, you'd think that I would find something else that I should be doing, but I don't. I don't. That's hard enough, I guess. It's hard enough.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And amen to all that too, Tammy. I appreciate that. And I'm not going to keep you much longer because I know you're a busy lady. I'm sure you've got lots to do. I wanted to sort of close this evening by asking so sometimes Jordan, I noticed and listen to a lot of his podcasts, and it seems when he's at the edge of his reason, so to speak, he goes from music and hints powerfully at transcendence and so on. Kind of in line with that, I wanted to ask you, and also you recently got into this lovely little piece about music with Bishop Byron, I most appreciated, and you talked about Hank Williams and folks like that, and some of these classic Christian songs. Even I Saw the Light, which is I love a song too. I wonder, could you maybe tell me a little bit about that, your interest in music and its importance, I suppose, maybe even just, it doesn't have to be distinctive Christian music, but it's especially Christian music. And maybe what are some of your favorites and why do they move you so much then?
In music, hey? Music. Well, Jordan and I, when we dance, we like to listen. We have a spot. He has a Spotify account, and he has a romance music playlist that's probably 7 hours long. It's very long.
Like my Bob Dylan one.
So, and people download that. And I've helped curate that song list because I won't let him play any music I don't like. So, and he's very good at that. If I say I don't like it, he deletes it. So we don't argue about music. He just Jordan's very good at collecting, right? He's a good collector, so he'll collect all this music and he brings it to me, and I axe the ones that aren't any good. And the ones that are left on all those playlists in Spotify, and they're many, many hours long of country and western and romance and crooners music and all of that. I've curated all of those because if I listen to a song that I don't like, I'll laugh at it. And he doesn't want me laughing at his music. So so he fixes it up. But we listen on our romance playlist. We listen to Billie Holiday is one of the people that we listen to. And I don't know if you ever watched the movie Jungle Book, but in Jungle Book, there's King Louis, he sings, and it's Louis Prima who is singing. So we listen to Louis Prima, and I think my dad used to listen to Louis Prima, so I introduced Louis Prima to Jordan, and Jordan thinks he's pretty good. So Louis Prima is another one. Tom Waits, we listen to a lot of Tom Waits. When I was about 19, I guess, I used to go to record stores, and I would just go through the records until I found a cover that I liked. I didn't know all the bands, but I liked to look at the covers, and I found a Tom Waits cover. I didn't know who Tom Waits was, and I brought the record home and I put it on the record player, and I couldn't believe what I heard, because he has quite a sound that's different from most people. And we listen to Tom Waits a lot. Jordan really likes Tom Waits, so he puts him on a lot. Leonard Cohen, we listen to Leonard Cohen. And we have listened to Leonard Cohen. We listened to him a lot when we lived in Montreal back when we were in our late 20s, early 30s. We listened to Leonard Cohen quite a bit. Let's see. we like to listen to some modern music. We listen to Arcade Fire.
Mhm.
Arcade Fire is a good band that we like to listen to. Arctic Monkeys. I mean, there's lots of bands. I listen to my son play sometimes,
Mhm.
but I like to listen to the most. I like to listen to him play. And Bob Dylan, of course, is a favorite. I really like Bob Dylan as well. When I was in Ottawa and Jordan phoned me in Montreal when I was finishing my university degree, he had been at a concert, listening to a woman named Jane Siberry. She was an 80s musician, and she reminded him of me. And so he called me, and because he called me, I went there, and because I went there, we got married. So Jane Siberry was the reason that we got married, possibly, or at least with it.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Tommy. And I'm delighted to hear you're a fellow Bob Dylan fan. I'm obsessed with Bob Dylan. I think he's one of the most interesting Christian artists of the last couple of 100 years. I think he's America's Shakespeare, no less. I have a book actually behind me, Dylan and Shakespeare. What are some of your
Bob Marley. I loved Bob Marley too.
Bob
I
Marley?
saw Bob Marley. I saw him in Edmonton
Wow.
when I was 17, and everybody in the crowd was just swaying to his music. And he was up there, and his dreadlocks would fly from one side to the other as he hopped around singing "I Shot the Sheriff." And yeah, he was great. I just loved him.
I have a memory of going to Egypt as a young man with my family, and we were on the Nile going down the river, bouncing up and down, and Bob Marley going.
Oh, oh wow! I saw Sinead O'Connor in Montreal. She was sitting by the river in a park. I guess she had come to Montreal to perform, and I just saw her down there. And yeah,
She had some voice too.
and,
I actually saw you, Tommy. I never actually mentioned this to you before. Actually, I went to see Jordan in like 2018 or something in London. Whenever my wife and I used to live in London, and you were right beside me for a long time in the crowd. I was standing in the
oh,
queue, and I was like really wanted to go and say hi, but I was like, oh no, I don't want to bother her. I was too embarrassed or too shy. I wish I had him, but now obviously, thank God, I've got the chance to speak with you. So,
oh wow, that's cool. Yeah, well, 2018, I just sat in the crowd.
yeah,
I, yeah,
you were way back,
I
actually.
don't know how you recognized me because not many people knew who I was yet.
I
But
don't know.
maybe your pictures were starting to be online at that point, probably. But I hadn't really done anything publicly at that point.
No,
So.
and I'm glad that you're a public figure now. I appreciate it. I appreciate your podcast and the wonderful work that you're doing. And I also appreciate your time this evening. I suppose to close then, if it's not obvious already, where can viewers and my viewers and listeners find out more about you and your work? And is there anything else you'd like to tell them that you're working on then?
Tammy Peterson Podcast, and I have clips on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all of that. Anything else I'm working on? Well, there is something, but I'm not going to announce it yet.
That's grand. Thank you so much, Tommy, and God bless you and your ministry.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation. It was my pleasure to talk to you.
I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. I'm on my way. I'm going there. I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going